Hi, I'm Alan Miller, one of the co-founders of the Together Declaration. Part of our series on Together Talks features a range of different people with all sorts of views, everything from digital rights and privacy to lockdowns, censorship, and a range of issues on free speech and others. And we're very excited to be talking to all sorts of people over this next period. The Together Talks is both a combination of panels and events and interviews. We talk to a range of people who have very different views. We don't necessarily agree or disagree with any of the particular people that we're speaking to, but we think it's important that these discussions are had out in public. We've seen so much censorship and taking down of different views in the last 24 months in particular, that we want to have a robust, open discussions and debate. We think it's really important for a healthy democracy, and we need to be able to let the light of reason shine on things. We've seen name calling and we've seen takedowns. We know the online safety bill is going through the motions at Parliament about limiting and suffocating our free speech. So what we want to do is ensure that we have as wide debate as possible. We all get to think and discuss and argue and work out our views and positions on certain things that are very thorny, and also where people have not had an opportunity to speak, we get that discussed too. So this evening, we're going to show you an interview that we did with Dr. Mike Yeadon from Florida. And of course, we've got Nick Corbishy on Scanned, and we've got many others that are exciting coming down the pipeline, as well as our events. So enjoy this evening, and we look forward to hearing from you. And remember, we're always better together, we're stronger together, and we have to be able to debate openly and freely together. I suppose the first thing is to say that at the start 2 years ago of the situation, you were very outspoken. Well, how do you see things now?
A lot of people, yeah, you're right. They did say I was kind of extreme. I've been really clear from the beginning. It's as simple as this. Quite early on, I realised we were being lied to. We were being told that the virus was much more lethal than I could see by looking at, say, Diamond Princess. 30 times more lethal than flu, for example. I thought, well, that's not true. And then later on, they were saying, you need to do lockdown. When I checked that, I thought there's no history at all. Masks, I knew they didn't work. I spent 32 years in respiratory drug discovery, including particle deposition. So once I realised that all of it was lies, and then I did a 360 and I checked and I found the same lies being told everywhere, I grew very afraid. Because what it meant was what has actually happened, which is, I'm afraid, a supranational plan to terrify the populations, all of them, and then require them to do things like lockdown and social distancing and wear masks in order, I think, to take vaccines, which I think are really just the entry point for digital ID. So I think that's where we are right now, and we've got to stop digital ID. Again, a lot of people criticise me saying, well, it's just an ID. It's not an ID, it's not just an ID.
Why do you think it was there was so much resistance for anyone asking questions and criticising? Surely science from Copernicus and Galileo is all about throwing questions up, challenging theses, and the clash of those ideas. What happened?
I knew the answer to the question you just asked before I really thought deeply about it. And the reason is, anyone who criticises any vaccine anywhere in the West is an anti-vaxxer. People got used to the idea that you really can't question the efficacy. It's safe and effective, safe and effective. You're not allowed to question it, which is bizarre. So if, for example, we discovered that a particular lipid-lowering agent, a statin, one of them, caused some side effects, you wouldn't suddenly say I'm anti all medicines, would you? But that's the implication. If you make a challenge about COVID-19 vaccines, you're an anti-vaxxer. It's completely absurd, isn't it?
These different things, even if they don't demonstrate efficacy, even if there's an admission like in the UK that masks, for instance, were more to make people take it seriously, why do you think they've been so resistant to any challenge and been so widespread?
Frankly, it's a fraud. It's completely fraudulent. And as I say, I became infamous for having challenged the PCR test. But as I say, they exaggerated lethality to make you frightened. They said that even without symptoms, you can infect somebody else, which is, by the way, not true. It's epidemiologically irrelevant, this idea of asymptomatic transmission. And I knew that, because I was a respiratory person. And they also lied about that there were no treatments, and I thought, well, there are always some treatments. It's a respiratory viral infection. You weren't allowed to talk about that. They basically hooked themselves up to the idea of vaccines are not criticisable, and managed to extend that to all of the measures that were being adopted. And it was for the same reason, that there were things to hide, and they wanted to shame you into not asking questions.
How do you think it was possible just to be so marginalised? Something you can't, obviously if I say something, make a claim, I don't have any of that experience, but you clearly do. How's that possible?
Yeah, I mean, without blowing my own trumpet, I'm at least as qualified as Patrick Vallance, and I worked in the same or adjacent laboratories to him at Wellcome Research like 32 years ago. So whilst he became head of research at a big company, he never started his own company, biotech, and raised all the money and sold the company. So I think we're evens. So why it's obvious to me why they had to attack me. It's because I had the credentials, which if I was allowed to be on mainstream TV all the time, it would take me a couple of hours, I think, to convince you that, my word, we've been lied to.
We had a pandemic strategy, and it was thrown away.
Yes.
Why is that? And then lockdowns were brought in. What's your view on that?
Once I realised that the things like PCR, and PCR is a great technique. Harry Mullis is worth watching, although he's now dead, but he told us all it was not suitable for diagnosing clinical disease, and it's not. I realised they were using it for diagnostics, and that was inappropriate. And when I checked about a few other things, I found everything they were telling us was a lie. And as you say, we had pandemic preparedness plans on the books. We rehearsed them and refine them every, 2 to 5 years. And basically, it's this simple. If you are ill, that is, you have symptoms, please stay away from other people. Stay home until you're better. That's pretty much it. There were a few other little bells and whistles. That was it. And I knew that, and I checked it, and I even checked it on WHO website recently. You can go and read it, everybody, 2019. But instead, they inserted this long list of burdensome things like lockdown, school closures, border restrictions, business closures, social distancing, masks, talking about asymptomatic transmission. The virus is very, very lethal. They made all of this, I think, into a terrifying mix of sciencey stuff. Remember, my wife and kids both told me they'd been really smart, because by using scientisms, most people just turn off straight away. Oh, I don't understand this. I'll have to just listen to what they're telling me because I can't reason my way to the answer. So it's genius. So why did they make us do all of that stuff? It's because it was never about a virus, Alan. I'll just be blunt. Quite before we had lockdown, which is like March 23rd, I think, 2020, there was this cruise ship called Diamond Princess, mostly filled with retired people, 60 and up. I'm 62, 61. And those are the people who are more likely to die if they got infected. And yet it turned out that less than 1% of them who were infected died. I know, because this is always the case, that we underestimate infections that didn't give rise to illness, so-called asymptomatic infections. And so what happens is the apparent lethality of a virus falls and falls and falls as you learn more. Because you don't know about the extra 100 people, the extra 1,000 people, like kids, who caught it, are now immune, no signs. So I knew when it was just under 1% that I knew it was going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. So I knew immediately this was not a big threatening concern to civilization. So when I then saw all of this stuff being put in, I became very frightened, frankly, because I knew it meant, very least a supranational plan. Boris didn't work out to change all of these things, or Matthew Hancock. And if Sage decided it, how did the French Sage end up with the same set of answers? Sorry, folks. I've done this 10 times on tape. Not one person's come back to me with an answer. How did we replace our simple pandemic plans that you can find on the website of WHO today? How did we replace that with this like 8 or 9 lies everywhere in the world at the same time if they weren't coordinating it? And the answer is they're coordinating it. So yeah, and I realised certainly by late summer 2020, I knew earlier, but I probably didn't admit it to myself because it's too terrifying. It's a burden I've carried. Why are these people, insults, why are they doing this? And it's the very least, if they manage to get us all to accept vaccination and digital passports, and we should talk about why that's so important, then all we need to do now is introduce digital money, which is coming anyway, solely digital money. And I'm afraid now you are a creature of an algorithm.
Firstly, we were told it was 150,000 deaths. Then we were told that, well, it might not be that because some of the ways of the recording were needs different interpretation. There weren't actual autopsies.
No.
And if you look at excess deaths as well in the home, and if you look at the last 5 years, you start seeing a very different pattern. But in your opinion, I mean, most people think that the more people died. Obviously, in some bad years of flu,
yes,
you can get up to often 15, 20,000.
Yeah.
What do you think happened?
I think about the same number of people acquired a respiratory viral infection, became sick because they were already old and ill and died, as normally do. So I don't think the number of people who died in the 2020 period when the quotes pandemic came through, I don't think it was exceptional in any way. So when they say, oh, but what about all these deaths? I've said we've never in the past used a bad, untrustworthy test like PCR that overreads. And then no matter what your condition is as you die, if you just die, and people joke, you know, if you fell under a bus, it's still a COVID death. So in that 150,000 are people who had a positive test and literally died of any reason. So what do I think happened? I think about the same number of people who would normally die of flu died of flu over the whatever it was, the 2 winters. That's what I think. And just to say again, the threat to the population was writ large when you look at the Diamond Princess data, and then you reduce it a bit for the reason I said, which is you never know who's been infected without getting ill until you start doing antibody tests. And when we did that, of course, the estimate of lethality came right down until it's about the same as influenza. In my opinion, we never needed to do anything at all in 2020, and nothing unusual would have happened, because as it turns out, they exaggerated the lethality of the virus. We'll all remember, don't we, Falling Man in Wuhan. I bet you've seen that round your street and your town, haven't you? I'm joking. No one has ever seen it again, because it didn't happen. You were lied to. I didn't realise it at the time. I remember thinking, my God, that's terrible. Stumbling along face down in the dust. Of course, it was acted. This was not an unusually lethal respiratory virus, and if we'd done nothing at all except our normal plan, which is, if you're sick, you're symptomatic, stay home, unless of course you need hospital treatment, then nothing unusual would have happened. The entire thing is a confection, it's synthetic, all of it. And I don't know who the ultimate sponsors are. I'm not a detective. I can only see what I see. What I can see, and I didn't realise it, is that Klaus Schwab's WEF have, quotes, penetrated the cabinets of a large number of sort of Western liberal democracies and other countries. Well, it's just outrageous that people who are aligned to probably the most consequential non-governmental organisation, NGO, are at the same time prime ministers, deputy prime ministers, chancellors of the exchequer of dozens of countries. Personally, I think that's such a conflict of interest that should be thrown out. So I don't know whether WEF has the wherewithal to have organised this, whether they're just the parachuted in people to make sure that the right levers are pulled. I've no idea. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I go as far as the data goes. That's as far as I go.
There's been a lot in the financial press recently, in the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, about central bank digital currencies, and that there will be one.
Yeah.
What you were talking a bit about digital ID, why it's a concern. What's your concern about those two things?
No, absolutely. So I don't have any problem with ID. I don't have any problem with being required to show my ID. So passports, for example, driving licenses, some sort of identity card with your work. I'm not an ID phobic or anything like that. But I'll tell you what most people don't know is there is not now a global common format digital ID system anywhere in the world. And what is being installed, and I use that word deliberately because it's a control system, what is being installed is this first ever in history common format digital ID. And the reason that's vital is as simple as this. If we pretended it was vaccine passports, and we know you had to present this vaccine passport, say in France, to gain access to certain food shops, you literally can't buy food if you're not vaccinated in these shops. Imagine if they said you can't buy food at all without vaccine passport, or you cannot leave your dwelling, or start your electric car, or spend £5 on your phone or on a card, or spend any money more than 10 miles from your home. I'm afraid all of those things are possible. And if anybody watching scoffs at this point, what, you think democratic processes will defend you? Give me a break. It won't be your government running this database. Remember, I've said it's a global common format, 7.8 billion. It'll be on some server belonging to an anonymous corporation, server farm somewhere. You and I will have no influence on it, what it says and what it's used for. So that's the one half. I don't want to live in a world like that, by the way. And we should resist, say no, decline, peaceful sabotage, whatever you need to do, because what I'm going to describe can only happen if that system is up and running. The second one, you're right, Alan, central bank digital currencies. It's basically cashless digital money. It doesn't exist at the moment. You might think it does, it's the same as your bank card. No. If you've got only central bank digital currency, there's no equivalent in cash. You can't take your money out, you can't store it in any way. But here's the killer. If the algorithm or a person or a political grouping decides that Mike Yeadon may not spend any money more than 10 miles from his registered place address, click, 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 done. Okay? If you don't believe me, just think about it. What it would mean is that your life would be under totalitarian permanent control. Do you think, for example, that's the end of democracy? You can't do anything, you can't say anything, you can't organise anything that whoever's in power and presumably has some influence on that database wants.
We did see that the public got organised and challenged vaccine passports and vaccine mandates.
Yes.
Staff stood up, NHS
I think it
staff,
did make a difference.
and had an impact. And surely, whilst it's really important to understand what the potential concerns are,
Yeah.
at the same time, the agency of the public and the potential to impose their will on elected representatives is still there.
Yes, England specifically didn't go as far down the rabbit hole of biomedical control, but Austria did, and Greece and Lithuania and most of France, bits of Germany. So if they had wanted to do it, I'm afraid, notwithstanding our campaigning, they would just tell you, you're in lockdown. If we see you on the streets, this is so serious, we will fine you, and if you keep doing it, we'll have to arrest you. I don't believe that anything was needed at all in response to the so-called SARS-CoV-2 pandemic. And if you did want to do something, you could have done the plan we've always done, like if you're sick, stay home, because most transmission was through heavily symptomatic people, so in hospitals, care homes, and sometimes domestic home. So none of this needed to happen. I would urge you, well, one, not to treat it as if it's over, even if they stop talking about COVID-19. I read a news article today in Forbes magazine. It's an American business magazine, and it turns out they're actually rolling out digital health passes across the United States, not so far into Florida. I was horrified. About half the states have already either adopted it or have given an intention to do it, because they sell it to you that, well, you'd have all your personal information in one place, you wouldn't lose your dental notes or your medical notes. If you collapsed, they'd know what prescription you had. So quite a good sell, but your lives have been perfectly satisfactory for the last few hundred years without it. So reject the common format digital ID around the world, because that will be used to enslave you.
So there's a big division, isn't there, in America?
Yeah,
there's different states. You've got you've got Texas, and you've got Carolinas, and you've got Florida. I mean, what do you think? Why do you think Ron DeSantis? Well, what is it about? I mean, you've mentioned some things, but what do you think is going on there?
I actually know a little bit about the backstory. I've not met him, but here's the thing: he's a lawyer, as a lot of politicians are. He's a clever guy, and when this whole COVID-19 thing happened, like most people, it was railroaded into doing whatever it was that was being suggested. So there was probably a suggestion list of closing businesses and social distancing and so on. But because he's an inquisitive person, he said to his advisors, you need to give me the scientific and medical papers on the basis of which you're making these recommendations. It's like, no, we've got this, sir. And he said, no, I want you to send it. I'm used, he said, to reading complex evidence in trials, okay, and corporate law. So he insisted, and they gave him big piles of papers. And after a while, he realised it didn't add up. And then he made some calls to Martin Kulldorff, Jay Bhattacharya, I think Sunetra Gupta, I'm not sure, and a few other people. And he held like a full summit. And at the end of it, he said, well, I'm opening up the state. So we owe Florida to that guy feeling responsible enough as a leader to actually needing to know why he was going to do something that had never happened in the history of the USA, 250 years old. And his thoroughness, and then eventually seeking out expertise he felt he could trust, and then act. And so I think he says repeatedly, Florida is not going to be a biomedical security state. So that's partly why I'm here.
Now you mentioned Martin Kulldorff and Jay Bhattacharya and Sunetra Gupta.
Yeah.
Obviously, the Great Barrington Declaration. They also were pilloried by some. They were taunted. They were smeared.
Yeah.
Now we're seeing press coming out. We've seen obviously Professor Woolhouse saying we should never really have had lockdowns. He was on stage.
Right.
Yeah.
So
but a lot of the press.
Alan. So we shouldn't have lockdown. Someone on stage has said that.
Yes.
That's very good. Masks do not prevent transmission of respiratory viruses. The simple explanation is they're so tiny that a mask is like trying to stop a mosquito using a chain link fence. Okay, they've been studied. I've seen 10 studies, sometimes with more than 1,000 people who wore blue masks, cloth masks, or nothing. They don't affect respiratory viral transmission. So I knew that beforehand. So no lockdowns necessary, no masks necessary. So the last lie, loads of them, but the last one that's fundamental was you can carry the virus around and infect other people with no signs yourself. Actually, that's not true. Anthony Fauci said it's always, in respiratory viral epidemics, a symptomatic person that drives the epidemic, okay? He did say that. You can find that on YouTube, and I say that too. So that means asymptomatic transmission isn't true. Why do you need to screen lots of perfectly well people? The answer is you don't. Why do you need to restrict them? You don't. Why do you need to close schools and businesses? You don't. Why do you need border restrictions? You don't. And then the lockdowns aren't necessary and masks don't work. The whole thing has been literally a confidence trick. I would call it a PSYOP, psychological operation. I think it was run by each country's nudge unit in conjunction with global tech.
Ofcom did have an actual, it was a policy not to challenge the narrative.
Isn't that very fine? I remember seeing that. I thought to myself, if they make a mistake and I spot it and want to help, the law is that I'm not allowed to. I mean, how dangerous is this, right? People say, oh, I'm a crank. No, I'm not. I had a full career in the pharmaceutical industry, a very boring personal, attitudes, not conspiracy theorist. I've never said a single thing in public, apart from my professional work until this came along. And then, wow, and the reason I spoke out is because I could see very early on when we were being lied to, which is very frightening when you're government. It's not a white lie, they're lying for policy and affecting our lives. So I kept following that trail of breadcrumbs until I got here. It's no good just being sort of scientific about it. People have lost their lives because of these policies. They've had their businesses and personal lives smashed, but lots of people have actually died. Probably tens of thousands of people died miserable, lonely deaths. The level of anger I feel for these people.
If you could say, well, these are the things that I think will need to happen to stop some of the things you've raised issues with, and how do you see yourself within that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty tired of it, to be absolutely honest. I've been at it for getting on for 2 years. I would like to be joined by other people from my industry. I'm not stupid. If you're still working for one of the big companies, you can't say this stuff, but come on, I must have loads of peers who are, in a position where they could actually take a chance and come and help me, because I can't, Also, I'll miss things. I'll look at things in a particular way. But I think we should oppose at every turn, without relent, universal mandatory digital ID. It's not good. And the fact that there are people who want to insert it in you, to install it in your society, should tell you that it's not for you, it's for them. So resist.